Today on Your Voice, Your Vote, Oregon's new Attorney General, Democrat Dan Rayfield, on President Trump's first week in office.
I think it's an alarming first couple of days, the amount of executive orders and threats that are coming down are very unprecedented.
What he says that could mean for Oregonians. Also, how this Oregon Republican lawmaker says the state could benefit from the new president.
I think that we need to have an open mind.
And from U.S. Senator to book author. The book is called It Takes Chutzpah. Who's the writer? Your Voice, Your Vote starts right now.
From Katu and Willamette University, this is Your Voice, Your Vote with Steve Dunn.
Hi, everybody. Great to have you with us on this Sunday, January 26th. President Donald Trump has been in office just 6 days now. He's already issued a wide-ranging list of executive actions, among them immigration policies. On his very first day, he signed this executive order.
That's a good one. Birthright. That's a big one.
On Thursday, the president's birthright executive order was blocked by a federal judge in Washington. That order would modify who can obtain citizenship through birthright. The temporary restraining order was issued in a case brought by attorneys general in Washington, Oregon, Arizona, and Illinois. Birthright citizenship is included in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. President Trump vows to keep pushing for that executive order to take effect.
Obviously, we'll appeal it. They put it before a certain judge in Seattle, I guess, right? And there's no surprises with that judge.
There will be another hearing on February 6th to decide whether to block the birthright executive order long term. Today, an interview with Oregon's new Attorney General, Democrat Dan Rayfield, on the birthright executive order lawsuit and how his office is preparing for future challenges by the Trump administration. Katu's Noel Ford interviewed him before the temporary restraining order was issued. Here's a portion of that interview.
I'm here with Attorney General Dan Rayfield. Dan, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, of course, we got to start talking about the birthright executive order, because that's the big talker of the week. You know, Trump put out this executive order Monday. I know there's multiple lawsuits challenging it. Can you walk me through your lawsuit?
Yeah, one of the most important things that attorneys general do in their work is ensuring that the rule of law is being followed. And so when you have the President of the United States that has, with the stroke of a pen, created an executive order that violates the Constitution, there's a responsibility of those attorneys general to then file a lawsuit to make sure that we are following the Constitution. And that's exactly what's gone on in this case. You have more than 100 years of constitutional and legal precedents setting forth birthright citizenship. You have actually a lot of Republicans in Congress and elsewhere talking about that this is a case that they're unlikely to lose. And the biggest issue here is when you allow any president, a Democratic or a Republican president with the stroke of a pen, to change the way our Constitution is interpreted, that's an incredibly big problem that can ripple out into other incredibly important constitutional rights that we have.
What kind of scrutiny do you think is going to come from the Trump administration for Oregon's sanctuary law?
It's tough to know. I think when we're looking at Oregon as a state, our values are incredibly clear when it comes to protecting reproductive health, when it comes to protecting our healthcare rights and values that we have in this state. And my role in the Attorney General's office is to make sure that if we are being harmed as a state in a way that is contrary to our values, and it's being done in a way that is in violation of the Constitution or in other statutes or administrative laws, it's my responsibility as Oregon's Attorney General to make sure that we're enforcing those rights and holding those, and in this case, the President of the United States accountable when they're violating those rules.
Yeah, and how do you think his administration could affect sanctuary cities and states?
One of the big things that we're keeping our eye on, and you start to see with some of these executive orders, that he's laying some groundwork, the President's laying groundwork with funding. And this was something that was tried back in his first 4 years. years. And I think it's very important to note that the first 4 years of President Trump's presidency really kind of shows us the potential of where he could go. There were more than 100 lawsuits filed against the prior Trump administration, and roughly about 80% of those were upheld, and the Trump presidency lost those. There were funding things where they attacked that in Oregon, and we prevailed in those cases. So that's the one area that we're really keeping a close eye on. Again, it's the first couple of days. I think it's an alarming first couple of days, the amount of executive orders and threats that are coming down are very unprecedented. I think there were some interesting people that were commenting on, had this happened during the first 4 years, people would have been really wide-eyed, and I think we should be.
So what would you say to somebody who thinks that the state's sanctuary law goes too far?
I think what a lot of people, I think, misunderstand what the sanctuary law status is from the very first component of that. Really what it is about communication between state, city, other type of government entities with the federal government on certain types of information and protections that are put in place under those scenarios. And again, for people that are trying to look at that, what I really try and focus on the different levels of responsibility that each branch of government has in enforcement of their own laws.
And immigration is, of course, like a big topic with Trump's executive orders, but what other kinds of executive orders, what other kinds of issues are you preparing for? Because, I mean, he signed a lot of executive orders on Monday. I'm sure we'll see more coming in the next few weeks.
Yeah, well, some of the things that we're deeply concerned about is reproductive health. Oregon has stuck its neck out when it comes to making sure that people have the right to choose. This is something that the Trump administration has talked quite a bit about challenging states' rights under these circumstances. So we're keeping our eyes on that. We're looking at the environmental protections. We're in Oregon. We care about our clean air. We care about our clean water. We care about what our state looks like and how we live within it. That is something you're starting to see some challenges and threats in that space. Again, funding for various programs. The Inflation Reduction Act, something we're thinking about the prices that we pay day to day. They are threatening the funding for potentially billions, if not more than $1 trillion of funding that could come down into the states. That's deeply concerning, especially it should be deeply concerning to our economy as we're trying to continue to move forward in this space. And then healthcare. Here in Oregon, we're a state where we really believe that everyone should have access to affordable healthcare whenever that is being threatened. That's something that we as Oregonians are going to take notice, and that's something that as Attorney General we'll be keeping an eye on as well.
You got some money, some funding from the governor. So what does your team look like?
Yeah, so when we think about moving forward and fighting, unconstitutional acts or enforcing the rule of law in any given context, one of those is you have a stable of attorneys within the Department of Justice that are really ready and willing to act and be a part of this team really enforcing Oregon's values. The other thing that you think about is we have a partnership among Democratic attorneys general and their teams across this country where we're working together to monitor all of these executive orders, looking at the fine language in each of them to make sure that people are following the law, and when they are not, that we're actually holding them accountable under those circumstances. Here in Oregon, very early on, before I assumed office, we formed a cabinet of legal scholars and folks impacted or that could be impacted in all different areas, from healthcare to labor to the environment, in a space where we can come together. We're able to hear information that's going on in their communities, so we as a state can be more responsive to the things that we deeply care about, as well as we can strategize, but then also relay information. In certain cases, misinformation can be a really big issue, and we want to make sure that we dispel the misinformation, but also make sure that people understand that there is a plan for a lot of the values that we care about.
And last term, Trump's term, his first term, we saw about 150 lawsuits from states. How are you preparing for this term? You know, there's so many topics, so many possible executive orders, laws that you'll have to fight against. And of course, the Attorney General's office is going to take the brunt of it. And, you know, that's not the only thing you have to do in the state. You have a lot of other responsibilities. So how are you going to make that balance work?
Yeah, it's really important that when we get done with my first 4 years in office, it's important to me that our communities are safer. It's important to me that seniors and working families feel like they've got someone looking out for them. And it's really important for all Oregonians for me to know that our Department of Justice is here to defend their values. And that is how we're focusing and moving forward and balancing those things. And one shouldn't come at the expense of the other. And so when it comes to the last value of where we're really enforcing, you know, and really holding ourselves true to Oregon's values, part of what that means is working incredibly hard, being prepared, not assuming that things are going to happen, but when they do, that we've done the work up front, and that we're ready to step in on a moment's notice and be able to file a lawsuit to preserve our values. It was the first day, or the day after that the president was inaugurated, when it was very clear that he had already violated the Constitution with his executive order, and we had a lawsuit filed in Western Washington in partnership with our Northwest partner, Washington. And there's a new amazing Attorney General up there, Nick Brown, and I look forward to continuing our relationship and working on these important issues together.
And then you touched on this before, but I want to bring up the Marquette University study. Attorneys General won 83% of the 155 lawsuits in Trump's first term, so I'm sure that gives you confidence with the lawsuits moving forward. Do you have confidence with this Birthright executive order?
I do. There is more than 100 years of legal precedent. There is constitutional precedent, and the way that we've been acting during this period of time, we feel very confident moving forward in these cases. And that's, of course, why we filed it. And I think it's probably also why you're hearing a lot of Republicans also say that this is a fairly weak case that the president has under those circumstances.